Welcome to the Outthinkers podcast. Plug into fascinating minds and breakthrough ideas that are transforming industries and the world. I'm your host, Kian Krippendorf, founder of Outthinker Networks, a global think tank comprised of corporate strategists, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are shaping the future of business. If this describes you, join us at outthinker.com. Now, let's dive into this week's episode.
So some of the times when you want to slow down are, well, maybe at the beginning of a project, birth of something. If you really want to roll out something big, it actually takes a long time to get people involved and on board. And right now, as we talk about this, AI is really this big thing. As it turns out that the most successful implementation of artificial intelligence in organizations, in the beginning, the leaders really take a long time to make sure that everybody's on board and understand it. They don't make it instant. They don't say, everybody's got to use it. It's got to be rolled out in 2 weeks. What they do is they bring people along so that they actually understand it and actually can work together, and they design a system and a set of norms so it can actually work.
That was Bob Sutton, an organizational psychologist and professor of management science and engineering at the Stanford Engineering School. He has given keynote speeches to more than 200 groups in 20 countries and served on numerous scholarly editorial boards focused around his work on leadership, innovation, organizational change, and workplace dynamics. His most recent book, The Friction Project: How Smart Leaders Make the Right Things Easier and the Wrong Things Harder, co-written with Huggy Rao, is focused on scaling and leading at scale. Based on 10 years of research, it outlines how to grow organizations. It suggests something really compelling. You know how we almost all by default strive to build frictionless organizations to drive agility and efficiency? Remember on this podcast, David Schoenthal talking about the need to focus on friction rather than just fuel, or Tiffany Bova pointing out that we grossly underappreciate the need to strive to remove friction from employees as they try to do their jobs. Well, Bob Sutton points out that friction is not always bad. In fact, you want to create friction to slow down bad things while reducing friction to promote good things. This can enhance performance, innovation, and help make sure you don't fall into the trap of letting bad things grow as your company scales. As you heard in the highlighted clip, Bob believes that scale and change can happen when you bring the people on your team along. In this episode, we discuss how leaders can create a path for change and growth, as well as how, as organizations grow, they become increasingly complex over time. This is a challenge I'm hearing a lot about with clients and our members, and how we can mitigate this. How to identify where to put in gas versus pump the brakes to slow it down when it comes to new and ongoing initiatives. Why running at full speed is not always the answer, and the surprising byproduct of doing so. What makes collaboration between individual team members and makes teams as a whole more efficient? What is changing in the workforce? And what has changed in terms of what makes a good leader in light of that? Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Sutton. Bob, thank you so much for being here with us on this podcast. It's great to have you here.
It's a delight.
Yeah. I've got so many questions to cover, from friction to scaling to leadership but we're not going to get to them all. I want to get us right into the questions, starting with the question I ask all my guests. If you could complete this sentence for me: if you really know me, you know that.
Most of the time, really, I just want to be alone writing, and everything else feels like an interruption. For better or worse, I'm an introverted writer.
Huh. And you write a lot of your books in collaborations. How does that look? What's your writing process when it's...
Well, it depends on I've just finished my 8th book, this Friction book, and I've had co-author relationships, for example, with Jeff Pfeffer, who writes so fast that I can just desperately, if I contribute 25% of the text so fast, it's just terrifying. And then with Huggy, I love Huggy, but for both of our books, I pretty much spend a huge amount of time going over text and talking with him, but I think I've written every sentence.
Gotcha.
So what I do with it's like every relationship, I figure out what I can do, but I live in sentences and paragraphs. And that's
Gotcha.
what I always say my PhD students, all writing is sentences and paragraphs you rewrite and over and over and over again. That's the process.
Second question. This is a podcast focused primarily on strategy and entrepreneurship. What's your definition of strategy?
Oh boy, that one's hard. And I've spent my whole life sort of hanging out with strategy people, but I'm not of them. I'm an organizational psychologist. So I'm going to give you two definitions. I'm going to give you the bad definition and the good definition. The bad definition, my first HBR ever with Jeff Pfeffer was in this, a smart talk trap. It's a bunch of people who talk about a whole bunch of stuff, and they spend a lot of time in meetings while everybody else does the work. So that's the bad definition of strategy.
Okay. Yeah.
The good definition of strategy is when there's a few simple things that everybody from the CEO to the person at the absolute front line understands what the strategy is. So it's a little bit of a tangent, but when it was working, there's a place called Phil's Coffee, which is a little chain mostly in Northern California. And it was started by a guy named Phil, and his son, Jacob Jabber, grew it, especially pre-pandemic. Everybody understood that the essence was essentially the moment where the barista and the customer had about a 30-second interaction, and everything built from that. And frankly, with the pandemic, I think they're a little bit off that game now.
Okay.
But they grew to about 40 stores.
Wow.
Just on that strategy. So
yes.
Anyway, so there's good strategy and bad strategy.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, the moment of contact and everything emanating from creating that powerful moment. Yeah, it sounds a little sort of Disney as well, or maybe kind of military, the point of contact on the battlefield and everything has to go into support of that. Thank you.
Cups of love. That's what Jacob Jabber would call it. Cups of love.
Cups of love.
That's what he was scaling.
Yes, I love that. So you've written, as you said, 8 books. You've covered many topics. The one that you've been writing about, podcasting about, sharing about, your latest book, which as we're recording is about to come out, but will be out when people listen to this primarily, is about friction. So first, could you talk to us about what you mean by friction, just to bring that?
Well, let me just back up just a little bit, especially because this is a strategy podcast.
Yep.
So we didn't mean to write a book about friction, but it started with a book about scaling. And in fact, if I look back, the last 15 years, what we've been focusing on is leading at scale. And it only makes sense in retrospect. So first, when we started and this is 2008 or so, 2000, something like that, we started getting interested in scaling. But at that point, scaling in the academic literature did not mean growth. It meant spreading good things in large systems and getting rid of bad things. That's what it used to mean before the venture capitalists got a hold of it.
Okay.
So in fact, it was the design thinking movement that got us interested in that. Then we started getting focused on growth. And so interesting, you said many of the folks who listen to this podcast and are part of it are in large complex systems, essentially.
Yes.
And so
that's right.
So that's, even though I've been in the Stanford Engineering School for 40 years and there's tons of startups that have come out of here, Instagram out of a couple of students that I met at one point, I'm interested in when things start getting large and complex and messy.
Yes.
So leading at scale, first it was, well, how do I grow it? Okay, now it's big. How do I spread something good like design thinking or get rid of something bad, since I for better or worse, I'm known as the asshole guys. How do you get rid of the asshole?
Right. The no asshole rule.
The no asshole rule. But then as organizations get large and complex, there's all these things that become hard to do.
Yes.
And so that's what happened. And even like organizations that had a lot of contact early on, Google, Facebook, now Meta. I was consulting to head of HR when there was 200 people. I don't think I did much good, but it was really entertaining. And just these organizations where things used to be so simple and so easy to get things done quickly, boom, it starts getting hard. And so so when we teach executives in large organizations, which both Huggy and I do, we'll start asking them, and then all this frustration comes out. And we can do a little therapy if you want, like how hard it is to get your expenses reimbursed, how hard it is to hire someone, how hard it is to fire someone, just how hard it is for customers to travel through a system.
Yeah.
So that's what sort of
got
us going was people talking about the good old, everything from organizations that grew from 4 to 50 people. They talk about how great it was in the good old days when there was just the 4 of them in the room, to, well, General Motors. I worked with General Motors for years. Oh man, is it hard to get things done there?
Yeah. I remember talking to an entrepreneur at a big consumer products company, let's say that services mostly animals and pets, but they said, it takes 4 months to create an invoice. And so we want to create this new brand to go up these new channels, and our retailers are, our suppliers. And so, yeah, I hear you. But what's also interesting is that you do talk about that sometimes friction is also good. One answer is let's just get rid of all friction, but
so it's really, yes. And in the book, we talk about this a lot. And in fact, one of our arguments, we talk a lot about subtraction, and this will be an HBR that just came out. And an HBR piece, we talk about that too. Our argument is the reason that subtraction is so important is to clear the way for the things that are hard and should be hard. Okay. And and we have a long list of like essentially when you should slow down. And we're talking, by the way, with a couple of strategy consulting firms about this because they describe all the CEOs they work with are exhausted by faster. And so some of the times when you want to slow down are, well, maybe at the beginning of a project or the birth of something. If you really want to roll out something big, it actually takes a long time to get people involved and on board. And right now, as we talk about this, AI is really this big thing.
Yeah.
And one thing that's starting to come out already from the academic AI research, since people were doing research on algorithms before ChatGPT came out, is it turns out that the most successful implementation of artificial intelligence in organizations, in the beginning, the leaders really take a long time to make sure that everybody's on board and understand it. They don't make it instant. So this idea.
What do you mean they don't make it instant?
They don't say everybody's got to use it. It's got to be rolled out in 2 weeks, and we're all using that GPT.
Gotcha.
Blah, blah. What they do is they bring people along so that they actually understand it and actually can work together, and they design a system and a set of norms so it can actually work. So,
gotcha.
So one way we think about this is the gas and the brakes.
Okay.
So you want to know when to go fast and when to go slow. So some of the stuff that should be hard, creativity. Teresa Mobley spent her whole career at Harvard Business School studying creativity. You can, and my favorite example of this is Jerry. I don't know how the hell this happened. Jerry Seinfeld gets interviewed by the Harvard Business Review, which is the most unlikely thing I've ever heard in my life. And it's actually funny, and most of Harvard Business Review isn't very funny, including my own work. And so the editors ask him, could McKinsey have come in and made your process with Larry David more efficient? And he said, then he asked the question, I love this, who's McKinsey?
I love it. Yes. Love it.
And they explain it's a consulting firm. Yeah. And then he says, are they funny? And HBR says, no, they're not funny. And I've spent a lot of time working with McKinsey. I have not met a lot of funny people at McKinsey. Yeah. Maybe one or two. And then he said, then I don't need them. And he said, the hard way is the right way. Because when you're doing creative work, it's really tough. And even in the domain of subtraction, the amount of work, the amount of friction that there should be to figure out how to actually subtract something, especially in large complex systems, is really important. And just my favorite example in the book, which is not a private sector example, is that there was a form in the state of Michigan for benefits, for childcare benefits, for food stamps and so forth, that's filled out by more than 2 million people every year. Okay. A guy named Michael Brennan, first time I ever met him. This is about 2016. He's at the Stanford Design School and he rolls out the form. And what happened is he was head of the United Way in Southeastern Michigan. He said, see this form? That's what I'm going to fix. Yep. This form, 42 pages, the longest form in the United States. He and his team, if you go to the end, they reduced it by 80%.
Wow.
And they actually implemented it. So millions of it takes half the amount of time for people to fill out. They make many fewer errors. There's many fewer lobby visits because people aren't confused about it. It really does good. It really reduces friction.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to do that, he did things like he got people from the agency who oversaw the form and brought them into an office and had them try to complete the form. None of them could complete the form that they oversaw. The guy who was head of it stopped after like 8 questions or 8 pages of the 42 pages and said, "Oh, help!" and then to do the new form, there was 1,300 pages of rules they had to comply with.
Wow.
So this idea of the gas and the brakes, is something that and the question of what's optimal velocity.
Yes.
And we have not answered this in our book. Nobody has answered this. In fact, if you could do this, you would be so rich in strategy, it'd be insane. The question of when do I go fast and when do I go slow? And I think we've got some warning signs in the book of when to go fast and when to go slow.
Okay. Yep.
But and I think you've described one. When it takes 4 months to get something approved, that's a warning sign.
That's a warning sign. Yeah. It seems like also there is maybe like where to go fast and where to go slow. So the way I was kind of thinking of is you come up with your strategy, you set up these priorities, then you look, what are the kind of behaviors or practices that align with the strategy? Because strategy is what you do, not what you say, and so you could use this concept to say, okay, we need to slow down this and we need to speed up that. Is that how you think of it? Or do you think about it as these are the frictions we have, so this is the strategy that will work or that won't work? How would you look at that?
Well, I mean, if I could answer, that's a great question. If I could answer it completely, I would just like be in heaven. I think we have some hints, but to me, some of the signs that I just sort of picked 2. One of the signs that it's time to hit the brakes and slow down. In Kahneman's perspective, you're in a cognitive minefield. Things are messed up. You don't know what to do. That's when you slow down and try to fix things. Yes. And I don't know how to go fast and try to fix things. Some people claim they can build the airplane and fly at the same time. Yeah. But I haven't really seen that work any place I know. And then the other sign is, am I doing creative work or am I doing routine work, which is closely related?
Yes.
So if you want, so it's the difference between, for those of us who've been to airports, Singapore versus Heathrow. If you've been to those 2 airports, Singapore, it's so easy. You don't even, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Unless you're committing a crime, then they throw you in jail. But if you go to Heathrow, you just can't believe how bad it is.
Oh, you're waiting and waiting to wait. Another line.
Another line. Yep. And you think you're at the end of the line, and then you have another line for an hour. And so to me, then another thing in this modern era to sort of look for that we've written a lot about, and I don't talk about ethics very much. It's one of those things that is my late father-in-law used to say, when people talk about ethics, I hide the good silverware.
Gotcha.
I mean, it's like people talk about ethics seems to get in ethical problems.
Yeah.
But
I know that you've had a lot of work with Pfeffer on the kind of that boundary, I guess.
But the sign is, and my co-author Huggy has some evidence here, and there's all sorts of evidence that when people are really focused on speed, they tend to cheat more. Gotcha. And you can do everything from look at what the value statements are in organizations, the mission statements, the ones that emphasize speed, people tend to get more legal trouble. Yeah. And then you do it in the laboratory. So that's another sort of red flag.
Interesting. Yeah.
When people are really focused on move fast and break things, they break the law a lot.
So now I'm seeing that linkage between when someone is, in your book title, being an asshole. Yeah. You said that, any of us can be assholes at times. And that time pressure maybe can.
Experimental psychologists are so good at turning people into jerks. Yeah. All they got to do is get them in a hurry. It's really reliable.
Yeah. All right. So I have so many questions, but there is one little inquiry that I'd like to get into that I don't know if either going to say, oh yeah, we solved this a long time ago, or I think this isn't even important, so I hadn't thought about it. So I've just been looking at, when you talk about friction, I've been thinking about teams and how some teams can come together and seemingly frictionlessly, even if they haven't worked together, they can collaborate. If it's a Navy SEAL team, they know who's who, or you're making a movie, you know what the director does. So this team can like come together without friction, without having to build trust because they trust the role. And yet they can be creative, but sometimes when we think about making really strict roles, then that seems like you can't be creative. So I don't know. I could ask a more specific question, but it sounds like you look like you have already.
I'm not going to give you. I don't think there's any complete answer, but some of the hunches in situations. And let's take kind of 3 situations, and you sort of named it them. And by the way, none of them are a lot of it isn't creative. But so let's make a movie,
Yep.
doing an operation, or flying a commercial airline.
Okay.
In all three of those cases, what you have is people who are extremely well trained, and there's really clear rules about who says what. There's really strong understanding of what the language is.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing, and I hate to say it, there's really clear authority. Like there's nobody negotiates over authority.
Right.
And all three of those are sort of dictatorships almost. It's the captain, it's the director, and it's the attending surgeon. That's the boss. So one of the people we talk about in the book is my cousin, Sherry Singer.
Mm-hmm.
My cousin Sherry has made, I think, 45 made-for-TV movies.
Wow.
These are not masterpieces, but damn, can she crank them out.
Wow.
Like most famous for the Halloween Town series, but she's still making them. She, things like a murder that happened in a high school.
Got it. I love that.
2 weeks of filming. Okay.
Wow.
And and she's not the director, she's the executive producer. And she brings everybody together in the roles, and everybody knows exactly what their job is.
Yes.
And one thing that happens in Hollywood that doesn't happen so much in other places, or maybe it doesn't, is that she has a Rolodex of people she's worked with over and over again. So you have
they already are familiar with each other. Yeah.
But to add to a little bit of a twist there's evidence even in those situations, especially when people do creative work, by the way, but routine work too, the more people work together, the better their outcomes are. So surgical teams, if you have an anesthesiologist and a surgeon who've worked, the more times they work together, the better their outcomes. And then if you look at creative work, let's look at creative work. Startup teams where they've worked together before do better. There was remember in the old days, since we're old enough, when everybody hired executives from General Electric?
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
There was great evidence that if you were a CEO and were hired from General Electric, if you took nobody with you, things weren't very good. But if you took 2 or 3 of your friends with you, so you had like an existing
team of relationships. Mm-hmm.
So this is true for Broadway plays. It's that when you have people who've worked together before, and there is a point where it gets stale, but this idea of having long-term relationships where people work together, it does help things. But to your point, there's all sorts of situations now where people who never met together can work together well because they understand the roles and the authority structure. You know what my job is, you know who's in charge, and you know what we're trying to accomplish.
There we go. That's it. No, that makes sense. So we're not innovating the process of creating the creative output. We are creating creative output, and it's not that we're complete strangers either. What is changing in the way that organizations scale, the decreasing of friction, maybe because of technologies, and the workplace, leadership? What made a great leader before? And how has that changed? A good boss versus a bad boss, say?
Boy, that's a really brilliant question. I hope I can answer it. We have to wait 1 second. There's a leaf blower about 4 feet from my...
Oh, okay. I can't hear it, but that's good.
Oh, if you can't hear it, I'll keep talking. Okay, so to me, what has changed is 2 things have happened, no matter how much some executives don't want it. The remote work revolution has happened. Mm-hmm. And in the large, complex organizations we're interested in, globalization has happened.
Yeah.
So you as a leader, and this has always been true, but it's more true than ever, have to realize that you have bigger blind spots among the people who you work with and how they work together.
Yeah.
And to me, and this is partly friction, but it's a general leadership stuff. You've got to be aware of the effect of the tools, the effect of the cultural differences. And so you've got to work together to make sure that people are coordinating and are on the same page and aren't overloaded. So that's why in the book, one of our main ideas is you're trustees of others' time. So that means that your job is to limit the number of meetings, limit the number of digital tools that people have, but then spend a lot of time making sure people are on the same page. And to be specific, one of the brilliant things, and Amazon's quite good at this. One of the things that Amazon has done, which is brilliant, and, to give you a whisper, I'm even hearing this is happening at Microsoft, because Amazon, they ban PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And every executive I know who goes to work there, they can be 25. They actually teach you how to write an Amazon memo. And everybody reads the memo before the meeting starts. So what that does is it allows a deeper understanding and coordination. So to me, it's again hitting the brakes, taking time to write, taking time to read, because sentences and paragraphs, to somebody who I live sometimes in PowerPoint and sometimes in sentences and paragraphs. I can bullshit so easily in PowerPoint. I can put up 3 points, and I think I understand it. The audience think they understand it, but then we say, well, what do we do tomorrow? I don't really know.
Gotcha.
But when you do sentences and paragraph, we actually have a deeper understanding.
Yes. And I could see that your thinking also remains more agile. It's easier to adjust the logic of a sentence than of a PowerPoint.
I mean, it's easier, and it's also more work for us to figure out what's exactly the right way.
Yeah.
So to me, this idea of slowing down where there's handoffs, where there's collaboration points, but also getting rid of the friction around it.
Yes.
So the unnecessary process, the unnecessary excessive, and it sounds stupid. We just did a little HBR about this with some folks at Asana. There's just a deluge of all of us just keep adding more and more digital tools to our systems, which sounds silly, but it causes problems. And that might have been why it took us a while to start, is it was a digital tool that I've never used this digital tool before. We have to, and it's not so bad to have to learn it, but it adds friction.
Yeah. I hear you. And that proliferation you see all over, in very aspects of our lives.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Bob. I have so many other questions, and you've opened up more questions, but you have great content available, accessible for people. The podcast that you recorded for a couple years has amazing content. Your new book is just released. How else can people continue to learn from you and stay connected to you?
So I mean, my site is the main place, bobsutton.net. So that's what I do. I am on X/Twitter. We'll see much longer it exists. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. But I'm and lately I've been writing a lot of short stuff for Harvard Business Review. Online stuff, and then some articles recently. But bobsutton.net is probably the best place to go. And the other thing to tell your audience, sort of a dirty little secret, if you write me an email, I probably can't resist answering, even though I should be doing something else.
Great.
I love messages from strangers.
We'll hope to send you many emails now. Thank you, Bob, for the work you do, and thanks for taking some time to share it with us here.
It was a joy to talk. Thanks so much.
Thank you to our guest. Thank you to our executive producer, Karina Reyes, our editor, Zach Ness, our audio engineer, Jack Tipper, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you soon with another episode of Outthinkers.